How persistent are you when praying to God for something really important? What assurance do you have that He's even listening to you? Daniel's 10th chapter has a look at that question. Remember how Daniel had been quite anxious over a series of visions promising restoration, but they all seemed to point into the distant future. And after each of these visions, Daniel felt quite sick, presumably thinking that relief for his own people was not coming anytime soon. His later visions built up that intensity. First, a little background. 1 year after the events of chapter 9, and 1 year before chapter 10, 50,000 exiles from Babylon returned to Judea after the Persian king Cyrus decreed that they could. However, the people who had filled the vacuum in Judea after it was deserted were not happy with this flood of people returning. All their work for the past 150 years was being challenged by people who were claiming their land back. So the squatters living in the land did all they could to discourage the new returnees from resettling, especially targeted the rebuilding of the temple to demoralize them and prevent any progress. If they were successful, maybe they could get their land back. So they used threats, sent accusing letters to the Persian authorities, did all they could to corrupt the priests. Their tactics worked. Work on rebuilding stopped. Public morale dropped to a new low. Maybe Daniel heard reports of this. By now he's probably about 90 and too old to make the strenuous journey back with the returnees. But he's obviously discouraged that God's promise of restoration was not happening. And he despaired that the prophecies of restoration would ever be fulfilled. He fasted and he prayed for 3 weeks. Daniel was a mover and shaker. He could have pulled all kinds of strings across the empire to make things happen for his people, but he was too wise to manipulate human politics to achieve God's ends. So he went straight to the top, to God himself. And his prayers were dramatically answered when he was on the banks of a canal one day, when there appeared to him someone fitting the description of Jesus before he came as a baby to Bethlehem. In the previous chapter, under similar circumstances, Gabriel appeared to Daniel, assuring him that he was greatly loved. In chapter 10, after Jesus appears to him, Gabriel assures the old prophet not once but twice this time that he is greatly loved. And then he explains the reason for the delay. When you first started praying, Daniel, you were heard. But the prince of Persia delayed me. Now I have come because of your words. That's a fascinating glimpse behind the scenes. We're not told the issue that Gabriel and the Persian king were contending about, but we are told that God contends with international leaders behind the scenes, not to bully them into submission, but to persuade and reason with them to follow a different course of action. But back to Daniel. What this tells me about our prayers, even if we think our prayers are not being answered, well, maybe they are, in a way that we were not expecting. But God always hears our first words in prayer. Note also the words of Gabriel. When you set your heart to understand, and when you humble yourself before God. In other words, God is not some great Father Christmas that we can manipulate because we're such good girls and boys. He is sovereign Lord, and we must always recognize that He is God and we are mere mortals. And He is interested in hearing and answering the words of His creatures. Daniel's prayer in chapter 10 is answered immediately. So there was no need for him to fast for 3 weeks. Prayer does not need magic words prayed by holy people. The stuttering words of a child mean more to God than the words of the professionals. Pious words by themselves are nothing, but God sometimes chooses to use them to alter the course of history. And that includes what you pray for as well.